Hello, I'm here with Curt Doolittle. My name is Noah Ravoy, and today we're going to be talking about the advantages of mentorship, coaching, and getting help for young men. Welcome, Curt. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Noah. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking to you.
So what I was thinking about is that we could talk a little bit about what is mentorship, what is coaching, and why is it valuable, and perhaps a little bit about the history of it, why we've lost the old coaching and mentorship networks. In reality, we lost a lot of the fraternities we used to have. And I think I just want to start off.
We didn't lose them. They were taken.
Yes.
On purpose. But okay.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. And I just wanted to mention at the beginning that the difference between the mentor and a coach. So a mentor is someone that you can go to when you have questions, when you have problems, when you need help. A lot of what Marcus Aurelius talks about in the first chapter of Meditations is his mentors. He also talks, though, about some people that were hired by his parents to coach him on specific subjects. So the coach is a little more specific. He will run you through a program of self-improvement. And he's not just there when you need help. He's there to get you to a point you couldn't get on your own. The analogy is a sports coach. Whatever sport you're in, you need a coach because that helps you get the last 20-30% of your potential out. Without the coach, you won't be able to hit your same level of performance and perfection that you can with a coach. And so coaches are very important in that respect. And it's very often people will have several mentors and usually one coach at a time, and they will use that coach until they've left his area of expertise and then move on to another coach for something else.
Yeah, I sort of think of it this way. I don't know if this is because what I do is, okay, how do I solve this problem? Develop an axis for it. Axis will deflate it for me. Well, I sort of think of it as a psychologist fixes a problem. A coach is training you in your behaviors and intuitions, and a mentor is providing you with subject matter expertise in a career or political direction. And so I sort of see the world as, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, psychologists, coaches, and mentors. These are words that we developed and we had to develop because they are one-on-one relationships. Whereas the teacher, instructor, professor relationship is generally multi-to-one. And I think before we started here, you mentioned that we used to do this quite differently. The mentorship, whether it was, it used to be, I would put apprenticeship in there as well. We used to have this lifelong progression of one-on-one teaching, which is really what we need. And what happened is that was fine when capital was fairly scarce. But what occurred in the era of industrialization was, of course, we had to move a vast number of people upward very quickly. And frankly, there weren't individuals sufficient for that task. This got turned into a sort of mental disease for us, or a cognitive or social model during industrialization, and we are still trying to industrialize the production of individuals, which isn't happening. Instead, what we're doing is we're industrializing the production of servants of the state the way that religion industrialized the production of submittance to their cult. And so I think that in the Western tradition, we would have to somehow, which is I think I know how, is return to the condition where we have more one-on-ones. And I think that unlike the period of industrialization, where we had to move a great deal of people very quickly from 0 to 1, we are in a position now where we have a great deal of wealth. We are inappropriately spending on really bad things when we should be spending it on more individualized teaching. And the more I study what's going on in the world, and the more I sample what's happening in different cultures, how those teaching methods work, the more I understand that the spectrum of this education process. That said, I'm sorry, I will come to a conclusion here. I was just trying to create the story arc for
No problem.
listeners. That there are places for one-on-one, and there are places for basically training, where it's many to one. A lot of things don't merit the intensity of one-on-one, and there are subjects which are so general that you're just teaching a general knowledge. The difference is with a professor who just lectures, a professor who actually tracks his students, and a teacher who is, as my sister, who's both a professor and a teacher, would say, well, I take responsibility for the progress of every person in my classroom. So, I think of it like a parent. And so we have to look at these distributions of costs and say, well, how can we combine these to produce the optimum? Anyway, so I wanted to create that story arc context, and so that we have something, we have a framework to hold a discussion with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to understand too, you mentioned we lost that during the industrialization of it, but for a long time it held out in the upper echelons of society. And even today in big businesses, the idea, they talk a lot about leadership, coaching, and mentorship within the companies.
My mother's coughing over here.
No problem.
She's quite ill, so it happens. I apologize.
No problem. The fact that big companies still talk about how important that is, one of the real problems with larger companies, Apple is going through this, is that when their top person dies, they don't have a sufficiently deep pool in the bottom of people they've been mentoring to pull up after them. And a lot of companies are having this cost analysis between sacrificing short-term productivity to spend more time mentoring people, and in exchange for giving long-term strength and stability to the company by ensuring there's a healthy pool of talented people to come up as older people in the company retire.
This is because we still have the hangover of running. We've incrementally lost it, but the corporation, as we understand it, evolved out of the military in the European tradition, because that's where the aristocracy was, and it was quite hierarchical. Over time, it's going different ways. The problem is the visibility of costs and return on this particular subject. When I run a company, I run it like a grad school program. And I get as many potential candidates involved as possible, and I distribute the administrative functions across those people as widely possible, and I rotate them. Yes, to some degree, Bill Gates did this a little bit too. You certainly saw it in General Electric, which at the time was, back before we had globalization, was probably one of the best run companies in the world. And so, these are lessons you can learn. But I think the problem is that the kind of person who is capable of running a company by calculation, in other words, the guys who run Toyota are, if you look at how that company is run, it's so tediously empirical. It's why the cars are unattractive, but they're fantastic.
They're designed not to offend anybody, not to be too thrilling, but also don't offend anyone.
Well, they sell
in the appearance.
They're designed to sell the women. Most cars are. The reason we can't get nice looking car, that's the reason. There's two reasons: aerodynamics imposed by the fuel cost by the government, and the fact that women are, responsible for 70% of consumption. I lost my train. Oh, okay. So the empirical measure of someone like Toyota, you'll have an empirical and aesthetic measure in somewhere like Honda. In other words, engineering at a company like Honda is a religion, right? It's a cult, and the way they do things is not the German way. It's quite beautiful, really, and most ways are different. There are people like Gates and Jobs that are both very talented, or Ellison less so, but these people are very, very talented and can drive this stuff underneath them and drive people to excellence. I don't think, Facebook, whatever his name is, what's his name? the guy who's in charge.
Yeah, I know who you mean.
I don't think he's
the name that shall not be spoken.
No, I just can't remember his name at the moment. Probably because
Zuckerberg.
Thank you. Sorry, it's because there's something distracting me, and I'm going to turn it off because it's distracting me in the background. And then there are administrative managers. At a company like GM, you're a politician, right? That's your political manager. At a company like Toyota, you're an engineering manager. At a company like Steve Jobs, he's an aesthete, right? He was trying to build an aesthetic around what had previously been a purely administrative or technical or engineering discipline. And I mean, we see these worlds very clearly today, but back in the day, I mean, if you knew people from Digital Equipment Corporation, who were the big computer manufacturers at the time, or Wang, and you ran into a guy like Jobs, it'd be those worlds were alien. I mean, the idea that you should make a slide rule aesthetic, I mean, just wasn't.
And if you looked at what they were producing, it was as ugly as sin.
Right.
Even the color scheme. I mean, colors aren't something you're technically bound to do in a certain way. They chose the worst possible, most boring colors they could.
Yeah, but it was so fun. I mean, I had a blast. That whole thing of going from punch key teletype, to the whole every phase we've gone through to now we're starting to talk more and more. It's just been fascinating. Anyway, I don't want to lose my point, which is that there are not the ability to run a company like a classroom, to run it by personality, to run it as a politician, to run it procedurally, and to run it empirically. These are different skills. And unfortunately, nobody possesses the portfolio. I work by running a company like a grad school program, mostly because I think of it as I have no idea who's going to perform in reality. So I just educate as many people as possible. And so I'll have a staff meeting with 30 people in it. And I'll run it like a classroom. Yeah, in the end, my partner Jim and I will make all the decisions. But I've trained everybody in that room to make those kind of decisions.
They act like a distributed network of intelligence to help to upgrade your capacity to make decisions, because they make sure you're covering all of these angles. You don't have to take the time to look into every angle.
Think of it as protocol communication. So everybody starts sounding the same, using the same language, the same metaphors, the same understanding. This allows you to change the direction of the organization by this continuous evolutionary process, rather than issuing policies and procedures. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All right. And so to me, the policy and procedure is down, but it's a purely, I mean, the accounting department has policies and procedures. The operations guy has some procedures he wants people to follow, get him the information you do, but he's not ruling, right? We push, just like I learned this from Gates, you push decision-making as far down as you possibly can, and then you harmonize the knowledge across that decision-making network as far as you can. And that way people tend to, customers used to say this to us all the time. It's just that you people all sound the same, and that's extremely comforting to a customer base, just like it's extremely comfortable to be in a group where you're familiar with, or extremely comfortable to be in a society that has very similar norms, is that your calculation of cause and consequence over time is simpler, and so you can have a more trustworthy relationship with one another. So in the broader sense, what I was trying to get across is, yes, you're right. There has been we are still shifting from the military procedural to the what I consider the vocational or educational system. And we have a pair of problems. First is that the socialists came in thanks to Boston Consulting Group. Guys are going to go to hell for it. In the early part of the 20th century, they they brought socialism, the idea of socialism, into the management consulting business, and they almost took down great companies like Hershey's. No, not Hershey's. What's the chocolate company? Anyone?
Cadbury's.
Cadbury's. They almost took down Cadbury's. They went through a bunch of companies. And so what happened in the 70s, which you guys aren't old enough to remember, but I was really quite young, the 70s and 80s, is all the middle management collapsed just like the socialist programs collapsed. In other words, companies got rid of vast numbers of middle managers in the 70s and 80s. And that's where your franchises came from in the 80s. Is all those middle managers in the world went out and bought franchise. I know because I was selling them. So you had this vast outcast. Well, we're still going through this. We've gone into the Japanese model and whatever, and today we're getting into this more tutorial model. The second problem, the first problem being this leftover socialism, and leftover militarism, is that not everybody can operate that way. I mean, there's people that have to be told A, B, C, D, and that's actually all they can do. And there's companies like I run, which is all high IQ people, and they'll make the right decision as long as they have the right information. What I found is the biggest benefit isn't giving them the right information; it's depriving them of misinformation.
Yeah.
And so what happens is if you communicate like hell, and I write a lot and I communicate a lot. If you communicate like hell, what happens is that people don't have the opportunity to assume you have malincentives, right? They just don't understand. So the first thing I did was we indoctrinated everybody in the company by giving a course in money, just so they would understand how money worked in business, because nobody gets that. I mean, it was novel to me that the average person has no idea that most companies run on a 1% to 3% margin, which is very close to the rate of inflation, which means they're just basically hanging around. You get a decent company, it's running in the 7 to 14 range, right, which is a couple times better, some multiple of inflation. And you get the outlandish companies, the lottery winners like the Microsofts and the Apples and the Facebooks that work at many, many times. But by and large, it's actually really hard to defeat inflation running a business. It's really hard to stay in business, and they don't know that. They just think there's money coming somewhere.
I remember talking to people who ran large supermarkets, and they were running on a margin less than 3%.
Yes.
And they were considering that was one of the more successful supermarket chains. They were able to get 3% margin.
It's usually one.
And their lost products was 5 or 6%, which means if they could cut their lost products in half, they could double their profit. So it was
irradiated and preserved foods, which I can't stand. I have to living in Ukraine just so I can stay away from the chemistry. Anyway, not because I'm a freak about it, but because I'm allergic to it.
No, everyone's allergic to it to a different degree. Some people are just, I think it's individuals who are higher output, I also output a lot of intellectual stuff. I'm lifting heavy weights, then I'm writing stuff. I'm thinking, I'm busy all day long. You're doing the same thing. Yep. We can't eat a crap diet. I remember seeing interviews with these guys. Oh yeah, they were living in Africa. I only eat every other day.
Yes.
But they also aren't doing that much, period. There's no work where they are. They're just kind of sitting around doing nothing. They don't look all that skinny considering they only eat every other day, a meal. Mm-hmm. And when you're a high output person, a lot of people I know that get sick due to food related issues are people who are highly intelligent and are putting out a lot of energy. Mm-hmm. And the brain can take as much energy as you're taking when you're doing heavy exercise.
Sure.
And we'll think for 6 to 12 hours a day. That's 6 to 12 hours a day of intense exercise.
Yeah. I mean, I notice if I run 2 blocks, right, I have asthma, right? So running for me it's work. Um, because I'm like, you know, uh, uh, I remember my partner Jim giving me crap. He's one of these guys. He's 6'4" and he weighs like 140 pounds, right? He has nothing to his body except limbs, lungs, a heart, right? I mean, he's basically a running machine, and he's picking on me. I'm basically built to lift heavy things, you know. I mean, that's and I'm like, I have asthma, and he's like trashing me for not being able to make this run, and I'm like, dude, you don't understand.
Our ancestors didn't chase down the woolly mammoth. They waited till the woolly mammoth got stuck in the snow, and then we walked up to them and poked them in the belly with a sharp stick.
Well, actually, my understanding is that, of course, we can outrun anything on the planet.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can run longer than you. We just don't have to run fast because they sprint and then rest. All we have to do is keep them sprinting and resting until they fall over dead, and we stick them with something. It's not very heroic sounding, but it works perfectly.
But yeah, it's important though, when you're mentioning to women, you talk about how our ancestors fought bears and tigers and lions and woolly mammoths with sharp sticks, because you see, that's a lot more impressive than saying we just kind of followed them around till they fell over.
Yes.
And we ate them.
That's true though.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like, if you go back far enough, this used to be, a lot of this was father to son mentorship, but almost always we would have times.
Extended family mentorship.
Yes.
The truth is that an awful lot of it happens with uncles. Matter of fact, some of the best happens with uncles. Dad establishes limits in most families. And so whatever. So you have to stay within dad's boundaries, but uncles are where it came from. And we've lost that layer
people don't have 10 kids anymore. So you don't have 5 uncles on each side.
Yep.
You'd have 10 uncles before. And because people would have a kid every 3 years, there would be this continual chain of children.
Yep.
You might be the oldest in your family, but you probably have an uncle that's only 3 years older than you, and another one that's 6 years older than you, and another one, and so you'd have these slightly older uncles helping you push the envelope on your abilities and develop new skills. Yep. And it was, I remember I was fortunate enough to have my great-grandparents alive when I was born. And for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, there was many people from their generation around. And I got all kinds of interesting things from them. This is back in the generation where they'd sit you down at 5 years old and explain to you how to pick a wife. They'd explain to you how to tell if someone was lying, how to manage your life, all kinds of stuff. This is what because a lot of them didn't have their own kids. And so there was kind of a little bottleneck there in the family. So I had all of these older relatives, and it really helped me. Go ahead.
Well, no, I just want to bring in that you were right. And this was what happened during the 60s revolution is this triple parentheses movement to say, well, it's a new world. None of that matters, and they destroyed the family. They destroyed that network, and they redistributed wealth from people who were successful in having children to people who are unsuccessful. And what happened is we lost that huge network. And if you go back and you read the literature, it was by design. Yep. Those people did that on purpose.
Well, they were most successful in convincing often the highest IQ people not to have children. It was incredibly dysgenic. And even if people had kids, they had a lot less children than they would have had without this kind of propaganda. And I think for a lot of young men, I was just going to say, for a lot of young men today, they many of them didn't even have a father. So not only they were deprived of their uncles, they didn't even have a father. Or if they did have a father, he didn't mentor them in the way that they needed. And so they were completely without this masculine.
They're feminized.
They were feminized. And we see even further.
By the way, which means infantilized.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
It means infantilized. Let's be honest. That's what it means. Whether the feminists like it or not, that's what it means. And there are psychological reasons, biological reasons that women prefer that, and we can find it in survey data. Women are more happy if they have a child that they can that will submit to them than is competitive and successful in life.
Oh,
And this behavior remains constant throughout a woman's lifetime, as she prefers to have dominion over her offspring rather than their success.
well, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that women who are not feminists, women who really appreciate masculinity, are most turned off by is submissive men.
Yes.
They instantly infantilize these men. And I was trying to explain to some of the women that would say to me, I meet this guy, at first everything is great. Then he starts he's too weak. He breaking down. He's got all kinds of issues and problems he's not dealing with. And I suddenly lose all my attraction for him, but he doesn't look any different. What's going on? And I explained to them that you've infantilized him. The moment you start taking care of him like he's a child, you've infantilized him. And now you can't find him attractive anymore because you're looking at him like a child, and that's not attractive.
My favorite data along those lines is guys who help around the house get sex less.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. And every once in a while we have to remind them that we're still men. And, there's different.
I told my wife, I sometimes the filter, too often, the filter isn't there. And I'm like, I don't like to turn my lens on people. I don't like to turn my analytic lens on the people I care about. I do everything possible not to. As a matter of fact, if I even feel that happening, I shut it down and I try to ignore it. But I remember one time I was going to say, my purpose is not to be a life support system for a vagina. Either things are mutually beneficial or they're not. And I'm like, oh shit, did I really just say that to a woman? Oh my God. It's like, oops. Thankfully we've been married long enough. She's like, oh, fucking Doolittle.
And deep down inside, they kind of understand what the deal is. They understand what the deal is, but because just like children, they're constantly boundary testing. Because they want to see if,
that's
men,
okay, right?
That's okay.
It's okay. We just need to not fail.
Yeah, exactly. Well, men typically, we negotiate a deal and we kind of expect that deal will go on until we all die,
And women don't do that.
And women don't do that. And not just women. As men, we have to understand that feminized men and certain cultures, they won't follow those rules. And if you're doing business with them, there are various groups of people who, if you listen to not the mainstream, if you listen to the kind of people we listen to, like, oh, you can't do business with those people. It's like, no, you just have to understand that there is no
contract.
Yeah, you're
contract lasts for the very moment you're talking, and it breaks the minute they walk away.
Look, they'll deal nicely with you as long as you have a gun to their head.
Yes.
Is basically what it is.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain groups of people that you can have perfectly wonderful dealings as long as you have all the power in the relationship. And you have to remember that and keep all that power.
Yes.
And there are other people who are honorable and you can trust to share power with. And knowing who you can share power with and who you can't, even amongst your own group, is, I think, extremely important for leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of young men, the reason there's a lot of young men that are thinking in that feminized way, and they can be helped tremendously by exposure to masculine men.
Yes.
And wherever they have to get that, if that means they have to join a sports team, go take jiu-jitsu classes, get punched in the face or whatever, this is going to help them. It's going to literally beat the femininity out of them. And
I've been thinking about this since you and I started talking, and you planted the seed in my head, and it's just sort of rolling around in there. And now I start seeing it because I'm trying to put all this curriculum together, part of it based on what you and I talked about. And how a woman wants, they're really clear about it in Russia and Ukraine. So I go back to that all the time because I think the women are amazing. But they say, well, I just want to be a woman, or I just want to love, or I just want to feel, or they use the term, I want to be weak, but that's not it. They want to feel.
They want to be feminine.
Yes. And so
that's really what it is. They want to be feminine. And part of that is, it's not weak, it's soft.
Yeah.
It's got its own strength to it, but it's a soft strength.
Yeah, and to me, you say, I love this this phrase. Woman's job is to love. Man's job is to work. And I hear that all the time. Now, realize there's strata in their civilization, just like ours. It's much more compressed, right? The difference between people is much smaller. The communists were really successful at that, and we can't overlook their success in doing that. They did a better job of making it rude to signal than I've seen anywhere. And if I could congratulate the Russians on one thing, you do not counter signal anything other than, yo, dude, I'm a gangster, I got this fancy shit, right? But I mean, it's like wearing furs and whatever, but you do not disrespect people without getting a punch in the face. And I absolutely love that part of their culture. So when we say women want to feel or whatever, you hear this from unfeminized people, women, and they're the ones that are emotionally okay. And the feminized ones, the ones, especially as they get older, become more emotionally disabled, right? Is because they haven't been able to do that. And so the guys, we have the same thing. We have a similar issue, which is I want to be able to go all out. And guys have no place to go all out. And so what I've been trying to think about is why didn't I took karate for quite a while I was in wrestling for a while, and then I took karate for a while, and then I realized, well, it's just about guns, so I just learned
guns. Gung fu beats everything.
Yeah, it's just, you might as well not bother. Basically, stay fit and have a gun. So that's all there is. And so what I found on what I liked in wrestling is that you can go all out. And if you what I learned from watching Roman Skaskiw in Ukraine, he's a little guy, right? He's a skinny little guy, and in wrestling in his peer group, he's pretty good. And so what I liked about wrestling is you can go all out. The problem you get with the striking stuff is you can't go all out. And the same thing, right? The same thing with, not without getting yourself hurt and others.
Well, you get repeated head injuries. Yes, it will cause damage. You will accumulate damage.
Right. And so, I wish we would teach every man the basics of boxing, which is basically how to
don't get hit.
It's basically, you don't hold your head still and create a target. It's mostly core, right? And you see most guys fight; they're fighting with their opposite. But if you watch professional fighters, they're fighting with their core. I mean, I loved the human perfection of Mike Tyson using his core to fight. It's terrifying. Now, the truth is if you watch Russians, the average Russian guy learns how to box the way you and I learn how to, ride a bicycle, right? And so if you watch those guys, I mean, they throw a punch right away, and that's all you need, right? You need that. It's the same thing with shooting a gun. You need the first 3 weeks of training, and you've got 80% of it. I mean, the rest of the 20%, it's basically what happens if I fall down or I get shot in the hand or something, but, you can hit a target pretty well within 3 weeks. It doesn't, that's why how they teach soldiers. The thing I'm getting to with wrestling, striking, gunning, hiking is the problem of male alienation. There's a lot, we don't have the ability to go all out anywhere. And so I only find this in group sports and in wrestling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you're always reserved in all these other conditions. And you can't get that feeling out that I'm a man. In other words, I'm all out. The animal is working through me. And so, and you can't, in a way that you're not going to be hurt, right? Even
my 5-year-old son likes to do that. We'll be wrestling and he'll jump up on some furniture and he'll go, I am a god, I am invincible.
Yes.
And right from a young age, the boys like to do that.
And so, if you watch rugby, Yeah, rugby. Rugby's a rough sport, but you can go all out in rugby, right? You go out in football, and you're going to get an injury,
Yeah.
right? Right. You can go all out in rugby. You can go out in wrestling, and so this is one of the questions I have for how do we create an environment? Because a lot of the stuff that we do is actually that we think is of value is actually incredibly dangerous, and it doesn't let you be it doesn't let you be inside, feel that feeling. And especially with young guys, I noticed that, there's a group of young guys that want absolutism, right? Be they're ignorant, but they're also just feeling, right? I mean, they're feeling dominance because they're young. And so, you see this behavior. So one of my problems is, how do we solve this situation again, where you're getting dominance play that isn't going to cause accumulated cellular or cerebral damage, and that's my question to you.
The absolutism that comes from, I think, too much exposure to things like video games and comic books, where a single hero manages to save everyone. It's just not. It's not how real life works.
No.
There has been and if you look who makes comic books, you'll understand where the idea comes from.
Yes.
There's a certain push to imagine that, you're just normal. You can't do anything. Just sit back and wait for an Uberman to come and save you. And the reality is that there is no Uberman.
Our name is Legion, and we are many.
Yes.
That's the answer. I mean, one Spartan is, you go back and I can't remember if Leonidas said it, who said it. Says, well, one Spartan's just like any other, but you put a bunch of them together and there's nothing like it at all. And that's the secret to the West.
Yeah.
Stop trying to be an individual, right?
Yes.
The whole point is, can you get on a pack? Can you negotiate your position in a pack? And can the pack go all out in concert?
Well, see, it would be obvious to these young men 100 years ago, because 100 years ago they would have been raised in the pack,
and they would have been using physical labor together, and so nothing was possible to do without working as a team. You couldn't do anything, and so we have all this stuff that we think that's made us luxuries, but it's actually making us crazy.
Yeah, well, it's why in the military you see those training where they grab a big log and they pull it along together.
Yes.
Or they'll take their fast boats and they'll flip them upside down and carry them together. They're not going to have to actually do that in combat. What are they teaching them? They're teaching them that you can only achieve your goal if you work as a team. And I think that any training for young men should include some types of camps like this, where they go through these physical experiences.
It's exhaustive teamwork. You've got to be able to do it when your reason is gone. Right? When you're so tired, your reason is gone, your signaling is gone, and all you're doing is being part of the organism that you call the team or pack. Right? You're just a limb in this thing. And that's the reason the military has that training, is to make you get by being this individual.
Yeah.
Right? Right? Because it's deadly to be that individual.
But you have to see a lot of these kids, and I've talked to some young men like this. So a lot of them, they don't have a father in their life. They were raised by a single mother. Sometimes they don't even have siblings. They were out on the street when they were young, by themselves. Nobody cared about them. They had to look out for themselves. And so they developed this extremely individualistic attitude, because they only had to look after themselves. That's right. The fact is you can't build anything that way.
No.
Try to make a building just out of sand. You can gather sand up a bit, but you are very limited in how high you can gather sand, because sand doesn't have unity, one piece with the next. It's individual pieces.
Let's just use the example that's 10,000 years old. Take a stick and break it. Take a bundle of sticks and you can't. Take a log, you can break it, but take a bundle, you can't. Yeah. And we're like that. And that's the thing about Western trust, is we developed a society where we can do that, where the team, the pack, the militia is one. And, other groups can't do it. And we don't know how much of it's genetic and how much of it's cultural. I suspect, like everything else, it's a mixture. But other societies have a very difficult time doing that. Certainly not East Asians. We and them, we do it fine.
Well, they have an ultra hierarchical society, and if you have experience working with these cultures, you'll notice that as long as the chief is there, everyone's working. The chief turns away, and everyone stops working.
Yes.
And the ability to work in small independent teams for the greater good of the larger organization is very lacking. I think the Japanese are better at that, but in a lot of Asian cultures, and that's why the Japanese are so much more successful than most of the other Asian cultures.
That's right.
And that and that's also why they get along better with Europeans, and you can do business with them easier. But this ability to come together when it's necessary is not something that we're just noticing now. This is something that has always been a thing in the West.
Yes.
To really trumpet it as pan-Western is, I think, perhaps newer, because we now have this larger vision. We've seen more of history, but it's not new. And I think for young men, they need to learn where their place in this is. And you cannot learn that by reading self-help books. You cannot learn that by watching YouTube videos where someone talks about the evils of feminism or the juice or whatever it happens to be. Whining and complaining about your lot in life isn't going to help you. You have to get with other men. You have to get mentors and coaches and get with other men and do things which teach these skills to you. Do things that where it's this is not something you can learn from a book. You have to learn it from actually being in the group, from being part of it. So
you have to do it by distributing the act of perception, cognition, and action among others, and doing it through cooperatively. Yes, and that is surrendering yourself a little bit to the group. And men who are weak and haven't been raised on teams, that's the problem. Same with women. It's not just men. If you get a woman who's either been very good at riding horses, or which is what I go for. I mean, I'm like, if she can ride a horse, then she's a candidate for me. And the second is women who've played on sports teams. Women who've played on sports teams, their crazy factor is a quarter, or a tenth maybe of women who haven't, because you have to go through that self awareness for the good of the team. And so if you can, there is truth to the matter that the kind of women who are interested in football are just better. It's not because of football, it's because they just think cognitively in that frame. So, there's a value to the women who are into sports, whether they do it or not, but not because it's sport, but because they have framed society well. I bet you there's studies somewhere about the demographic distribution of women who join sports teams and genetic family structures. I bet I can, that someone has to have done that.
At some point, at this point, everything's been studied. But no, even... I did an interview earlier in the week with someone talking about female groups and how women make friends and how female groups function. And, she was talking about how there's not usually as much hierarchical structure there, and how it's just kind of like you're older, therefore you're in charge. Whereas with men, it's very merit-based. And
yes.
Although age usually plays some role, it's also very merit-based.
And older guys don't mind. If an older guy learns generally being in charge actually sucks. I'll only be in charge if nobody else can be better than me, right? Whereas a younger guy's like seeking to be the guy in charge, but you sort of go through this lifetime curve of, oh God, thank God he wants to do that job, because but as you're young, you want the experience to do it. And so you go through his lifetime careers.
Well, and in fact, speaking of that, we've talked before about how men can form their own groups, their own male groups, not just for friendship, but to actually accomplish things in the greater world. So that could be forming companies all the way to forming your own militia. And if you're a man, one of the best ways you can do that is either to get under a mentorship and coaching program with someone, or be the mentor and coach. If you're a little bit older and you're more experienced, if you're 30 years old, go recruit a bunch of 18 to 21-year-old guys and start creating your own group. Say, okay, I'm gonna teach you guys how to be men. You're a bunch of fatherless young men, and I'm going to teach you guys how to be men. You do that, you have your group. The intensity of the kind of training that's within that situation creates a strong bond of loyalty. And this is, if you look at even the military bonds of, say, the ancient Greeks, a lot of this was, these military units were together sometimes for 20, 30 years.
Right.
They'd be together, and they would be as much like a family as if they were blood related. And there was,
can I throw in the Finnish model of education? They try to keep the teacher with the students the same way.
Yep. Yes.
For the same reason.
Exactly. And you want to create your own little group. That's how you do it. If you're a young man and you're too young to be the mentor, and you want to go find a mentor, you have to understand that no one's going to mentor you just because. You have to offer something to the group. When you want to join a group, you have to buy in. Any group that doesn't have a buy-in, any group that's too easy to get into,
isn't worth being in.
They have to, they have to be willing to give you a chance, but you have to have a buy-in. And very often, the higher the cost of the buy-in, the better of value it will be to be in that group.
Well,
because every guy who's in that,
I just say the cults work the same way. All organizations work the way. The higher the buy-in, the more durable the cult. The lower the buy-in, the less durable the cult. So it's not only value; it's that not only is the value not there, but it won't persist even if it was.
Well, this is what I tell people who say, well, what are we going to do? We have to change the laws about divorce and alimony and stuff. And I'm like, yes, we do. But until we've changed those laws, if you and your spouse belong to a group where you had an expensive buy-in to get there and it took you years to earn your way up in that group, and that group is intolerant of unnecessary divorces, you're not going to get divorced, because the group is going to pressure you to work things out with your spouse, and neither of you are going to want to give up being part of that group because you've made such an expensive buy-in. And so your chances of divorce reduce. The same with this. This is why in the Western world we had such high trust, because to get reputation in the West was based on merit. You could earn, there's lots of cases where people who were low born earned their way up through, whether battles or whatever it happened to be, they earned their way up to a position of status. And they were going to be a lot more trustable than someone who is granted status based on, they inherited it from their father. And so when we had a high trust society, we also had a society with a fairly high buy-in and very strong repercussions for not, for example, you mentioned with manoralism, we were talking about that one time before. If you owned a manor and you had to get someone to come in and run a tract of your land, there was a certain buy-in they had to have to get into that. You had to be sure this was someone trustable. Otherwise, you weren't going to collect sufficient taxes on that, and you couldn't pay up to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And so we always had this buy-in in society. There was a buy-in to get into the church. There was a buy-in to be part of a military unit. It used to be you had to buy your commission.
Yes.
This all meant that we had skin in the game all the way through our cultural interactions. And nowadays, parents don't even have a buy-in with their kids. So if
you're making a set of arguments that are instances of the broader argument that is that the herd, the feminine dysgenic egalitarian herd has been successful in using the Ashkenazi counter-enlightenment of Marxism, socialism, Boasian anthropology, Freudian psychology, and all that other drivel, plus the postmodern denialism and sophism. They've saturated the public with this falsehood in order to, because frankly, truth is a disadvantage to the herd. Truth is a disadvantage to egalitarians. Truth is an advantage to the pack, and truth is an advantage to meritocracy. But truth is a disadvantage because truth disallows parasitism, whereas lying, all this lying they're doing, allows redistributive parasitism against the will of the pack. So, what's happened is this concept you're talking about, which is no responsibility is the word we use, but it means no cost, of entry and no cost of defection.
Yeah.
So that's what that means, is that the attempt here to turn the West into another Levantine disaster, is been fairly successful because we allowed people to redistribute from us. Now, if we take away the redistribution, the ability to redistribute from us, all those things get reversed. I mean, it wouldn't be possible to have what we have today if we weren't destroying the white middle class in order to fund the people that are destroying it. I mean, it wouldn't be possible. You wouldn't have people coming here if we didn't have these subsidies.
Yep.
You wouldn't have marriage if we didn't have divorce subsidies. It's much better in a woman's interest if she has any income at all to divorce her husband, if he's at all other than a net increase. In other words, if he's a little bit here and she can do as well or better without him, she just rids herself of the cost. Well, this is what's happening if we made this possible.
Yes.
So, it's all the same.
And we no longer, I mean, a woman gets divorced and nobody anymore says, oh yeah, that's terrible. You need to go and make up with your husband. She starts talking to her friends about divorce and they're all encouraging her to do it.
Well, not only that, is that I can't tell you, if you travel around the world and you travel in the right circles, I can't tell you how many conversations I've overheard where she's saying, well, if I stay married to him for 3 more years, I can take everything he's got. You hear those all the time. You hear most men, they talk about, my ex is a lunatic or she's crazy or whatever, but they don't hate them, right? Yeah. They hate the behavior, but they don't hate them, where women generally despise, hate, and dismiss them. This is the difference between male loyalty and female devotion. Devotion is temporary, and it's successful while it goes on. But women are loyal and devoted to their kids, but they're only devoted to their men.
Well, and this is also part of the fact of that is as we mentioned before, when women see a man as being helpless, they will infantilize him, and then they will no longer be attracted to him and see him as a partner. The state has created a situation where, in the face of the violence of the state, men are quite helpless to prevent women from taking all of their money. And so that the state itself starts to infantilize men.
Well, I mean, of course it does. I mean, the interest of the state is to create dependence. I mean, that's the interest of the state. That's always the interest of the state. So the problem is, that's why rule of law is so important. Is the state is bound by rule of law, and you can use the instrument of the law to constrain the state. But the 20th century has been an exercise in repeated sophisms and practicalities and moralisms in order to destroy rule of law. We don't have rule of law anymore. We have rule of legislation. We have majority rule. We don't rule law anymore.
Well, that's why the elections have become so important, because whoever wins the election can do literally whatever they want. And
right. I mean, this is the basic socialist argument. All that matters, the postmodernist argument. The only thing that matters is power, so grab power by any means. That's what it means. Well, that's irreciprocity, right? So for any white Western male, that very statement means, well, we're at war then, right? Then if there's by any means, any means includes violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have no problem using violence against us. When the communists took over Russia, they had a list of who they were going to kill. This was not. They were not shy about the fact that violence is necessary. If you look today at them talking about confiscating everyone's guns or whatever it happens to be, they say very clearly in there, oh yeah, if they don't give up their guns, we'll send police to kill them.
Yep.
They have a very nonchalant idea about the use of violence. And I think they're partially nonchalant about it because they themselves are incapable of successfully using violence at the moment. And so they don't realize how powerful and they don't realize what a thing they're messing with. And I think for those who are...
Well, they can't believe it, because just like we can understand them, but they can't understand us, right? They can't believe doing it, so they can't believe we'll do it. The thing is that they don't understand that, frankly, we'd rather do that than this. In other words, it doesn't take many of us who says, well, frankly, I'd rather rule.
Yeah. Well, I'd rather rule
I'd
than
rather
be
rule by violence. I would. I mean, there's no problem because it's in the interest of me and my people to rule by violence. So either we're going to cooperate reciprocally, or we're going to rule by violence. They can't. They think they're going to win this argument, and the problem is they think it takes mass numbers. It doesn't. It takes a couple 100,000 of us. That's all.
well,
If I had 1,000 guys today, I'd have 10,000 guys in 3 weeks, and I'd have 1 million guys in 3 months. With 1 million guys, after that, it's all over.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is a big part of where the mentorship comes in as well. A lot of people that need mentorship, they have ordinary day-to-day life concerns that they need help with, or with coaching. And that's great. That's a very important part of it. But a bigger part of it is that if the men of the West are to unite and be free, we need to work together in groups. We need to know, as we mentioned before, how to submit to the group, how to choose a group that is worth submitting. And there's going to need to be mentorship and coaching involved in that on a large scale.
I agree. Now, I get these requests every day, right? How do we get the cost so that it's tolerable for the kind? Because the problem is, the more affluence you have, the easier it is the less demand there is. In other words, there's more demand for the people. The second thing is, how do they know an idiot from a non? I mean, this is the real issue, because just like I say, women. The reason women choose men badly is because they are attracted by what they know, they understand. Whereas, the problem is what they understand may not be good for them. Well, the same thing for guys is that first we form a very clear class hierarchy among guys, and we wear different uniforms, we use different language, we have different values. And so how do I find somebody in my class? And then how do I separate the idiot from the non? I mean, how do I
know if this guy's advice is going to get me killed? What you have to ask is, how do I know if this guy's advice is going to get me killed, or
it's just going to be a waste of my time?
I will tell you this. It's going to
turn me off of coaching altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we know? I mean, so this is part of the project I'm concerned about, which is, I think there's got to be some way to separate a coach that is going to make you a man from a coach who's just, I know an awful lot of these lifestyle coaches, they're fucking the women. They're lunatics, right? They're the last people in life you could take advantage from. I'm thinking of one in particular who, she has this, but meanwhile she practices magic and voodoo and whatever stuff. And she ought to, and she's been crazy for, as long as I've known her, which is 20 years. So, there's a lot of those out there. What they're really doing is saying, I can't get any attention. Let's create the equivalent of a new religion to pretend I have a capability in order to get attention.
A lot of it's cults of personality.
So how do we know how does a guy choose a mentor? I mean, for example, it's pretty easy to choose you because, you're out there, you've got a public persona, people can judge the stuff, judge the talks you give, etc. But how do these guys know who to choose? I mean, what do they do?
Well, and as you mentioned, the cost thing is interesting. So I'm going to say two things about that. One is, if you become a better man, you're going to earn more money. So your cost in the short run, you got to start it. But, most of my clients, 3-4 months in, they're getting major raises because I'm telling them how to negotiate, how to be assertive, how to go in there with your head held high and deal with the people that are stopping you. A lot of people, I just said, hey, your job sucks. Go get a new one. And they're like, I don't think I can do that. Okay, let's work through the process. A couple of weeks later, they got a new job.
Yeah.
On average, I'm seeing increases between 30 to 50% for most men, and a few have doubled their income in a year.
Yeah. So
a lot of times your ability to earn money is way higher than what you're currently doing. And you just need someone to help you unlock that. The other thing is with cost is that I try to keep my costs really low. I live in a low cost country so that I can do that. But there is a shortage of really good coaches, and the really good coaches charge a lot of money. There are coaches that charge $1,000 an hour for coaching. I'm nowhere near that.
So what should an average guy, We're talking about an average guy
Yeah,
who's raised
exactly.
by a woman who is feeling lost. He has not enough male teams to be a member of, part of. He doesn't feel like he has. What does he got to expect to pay? What should he expect to pay, and how? Let's say per month.
I would say per month, he should be thinking, if he wants to have a coaching session twice a month, he should be thinking something around 100 and 130, 40 euros, a dollar, sorry,
Yeah.
a month. I'm just trying to do the conversion rate because I charge in euros. 130 or $40 a month. Okay, so that's going to be no more than 10% of his income.
Mm-hmm.
And even I have some clients who have very low income and they're still getting coaching because they know in the long run this is an investment back into
Yeah.
themselves.
It's like it's the education you didn't get because you and I wish more guys would get coaching and join sports teams than I would wish they spend $100,000 in education. It means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Because demonstrated behavior is far better than paper behavior.
And even if you're thinking of going to school, you say you're 18 and it's your last year of school, go get some coaching. Ask your parents for help or get a summer job, an after school job or something. Get some help so that you're making good decisions with your time. There are too many people that waste 5 years of their life and 100 grand and they didn't really get an education. All they got was a diploma.
Well, what they got was to party for 5 years.
Sorry?
What they got was to escape the workplace for 5 years and to have some parties.
Yeah. I know people, see in Europe here, the government pays a large portion of the schooling. And so because of that, people don't have skin in the game. They make terrible decisions, and I know one person. I was talking to them, 5 years, they studied art history. Oh, but it was almost free. It was 5 years of your life. Would you like to die 5 years younger? I mean, would that, what would you give for 5 extra years of your life?
Of course, my undergraduate degrees in art, but then, I didn't ever expect to try to make a living with that. I did that for my soul, my mind and my soul. And for me, I would make money if it wouldn't make any difference what field I went in.
Well, you got exactly because you have to understand that men like you and I, we're at a certain level where it doesn't matter. Like I dropped out of high school at 15 years old, and then I did take some courses after that, but I finished it in a private high school that I paid for myself, and doesn't matter. We could have never gone to school and we'd still be successful.
You probably don't know. I don't know if I can use his name. He goes by his name is Ayalam. He's from Ghana. I love this guy's stories. Like he didn't learn to read until he was like 12 or something, either 10 or 12. And he was in Oxford by the time he was 17.
5 years later.
I talked to this guy, he's culture, whatever. He doesn't like my nationalism, but I mean, I value this guy's friendship like you wouldn't believe because there's just not a lot of guys like us you can talk to, and it's like, well, it really wouldn't matter. Throw me on a desert island with 3 guys, and I'll build an empire, right? I mean, it doesn't make any difference, right? But that's not. You can't. It's not fair to judge. It's like pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You can actually train a guy. You can train a lot of guys to be successful. It doesn't take a lot of work, really. They actually need permission to take risks without having to feel self-criticism. They just need mindfulness. And
well, a huge part of it is they have a bunch of negative programming that says to them that your ancestors are responsible for all the world's evils. You are evil. You're a man, and your toxic masculinity is holding the world back, and they're constantly bombarded by this kind of programmed marketing that says that they should act like women or that they should be let other people have their chance now, and so they don't have permission to act like men, as you said. And actually, I'm coming out later this month with a course that will be online, that will be very inexpensive, you can purchase it with coaching, and so I deliver it to you, or if you can't afford that, you get it on your own. And that's going to be very basically how to unprogram yourself from negative propaganda, how to make sure that you love yourself, I talk to a lot of young men, and one of the early questions I ask them is, how do you view yourself? And they'll say, I don't know. I don't care. They're completely indifferent to themselves. And I said, if you had a friend and you were to describe him the way you just described yourself, would you want to do good for that friend? Would you want to help them? And they're like, no. Well, that's why you're not motivated to take care of yourself. You're not motivated to take care of yourself because you don't have any self-love. And to unprogram them from the programs that are preventing them from developing self-love, and to reprogram them. I believe the human mind is extremely plastic, very flexible. Sure, and we can do a whole lot to reprogram ourselves. Changing everything from, I even think the big 5 personality traits can be quite significantly modified. And of course we need to play off our strengths, but I think that they can be modified quite a bit. You can change so much in 3 months.
I registered from extremely introverted to extroverted over the course of 10 years. And now I can feel it. Like, the idea of thinking like that in the past is horrible to me. So you definitely can modify you can definitely modify those personality traits to some degree. You can train them, yes.
Yeah, and I think
I'm not sure about neuroticism, but the rest of them.
Yeah, well, and I have, 3 out of 100 in neuroticism score. So I have almost no neuroticism, and that sounds great because highly neurotic men are not very useful a lot of times, and so you'd think, oh, the opposite is better. The problem is when you're this low in neuroticism and you see the bear coming, you're like, oh, that's an interesting bear. You tend to stand in front of the train and not be afraid. And no fear isn't good as well. So I've had to train myself, trying to bring myself back a little bit to a mean. But it's teaching young men to reprogram themselves. Whatever programming they end up with at the end of the course is not their final programming, because they can reprogram themselves again for later in life. They might be, okay, I'm going to go. I'm just about to sign a contract to go for some job for 3 years somewhere. And I have to think a certain way while I'm in that job. I'm going to go out working mining for 3 years. Okay. So I'm going to focus all my life around making some money for 3 years. So they're going to have to program themselves to think in a certain way. Mm-hmm. But that, when you're married and you come home, you can't, as you mentioned earlier, you don't want to have that analytical mind, that work mind on when you're dealing with your wife and kids.
No.
And so men need to know how to program. And I think men are much better at reprogramming themselves than women. Women are better at being reprogrammed by the environment around them.
That's correct.
And men are better at reprogramming themselves. And so we can really do a lot to change who we are. I'm going to be having a Facebook group as well for that, anyone that's in the course. And I'm going to launch that later in the month. You can, if you want to find out more about it, go to smv4k.com and register for the newsletter, because I'll be definitely sending information out about that. And this is a place to start, because you can't, I have young men contact me and they have political aspirations and they want to do something and they want to get involved. They want to get interested or active in things. And some of them have done things like the Charlottesville rally and completely ruined any possibility of a future political career for themselves. Yeah. And they need to get all the negative programming out, and they need to reprogram themselves before they get involved in that. They cannot change the world until they have total control of themselves.
That's right.
This is basically, in a way, it's picking up. Jordan Peterson did some valuable things in encouraging young men to start thinking about changing themselves before they change the world. Okay. He didn't give a whole lot of actual specifics of what to do. Exactly. Well, then also too, he's not I don't want to speak too much about him, but he has a difficult time with certain truthful subjects. We'll just leave it at that. But there is a limit to what he was able to offer young men. And once you've gotten that idea that you must be strong yourself in order to start making changes in the world, then this is the right course for you. This is going to help you to start to actually take the actions you need to reprogram yourself, to get yourself strong so that you can do whatever it is that is your place, where you fit in on the team.
Beautiful.
So I think this is a great place to stop. And thank you very much, Curt, for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Awesome. And if you're watching, please subscribe and hit the like button. And join us on smv4k.com. You can sign up for the newsletter that's at the bottom of the page, and you'll get all the information that comes out. We usually send a newsletter out about once a month, and you can get that so that you have a digest of what we've been talking about each month. Thank you.